I think one of the things that I will miss the most that Ian unfortunately devastated was the Fort Myers Beach charm
Yeah.
that we had. What do you think the redesign, you know, rescape of Fort Myers Beach looks like 5 years from now?
Fort Myers Beach to me is going to be the most interesting market locally to observe. For one, it was our market that was decimated, the worst. It was completely obliterated in terms of, taking the northeastern eye wall and the surge and just the wall of
Combination
water.
of two punches.
Yeah. But it's also been our market that for several years, if you look at all of our coastal communities, Fort Myers Beach has tended to trade at a discount because there were some older uses and some uses that maybe weren't consistent with current market standards. So Fort Myers Beach is a scenario where I think we're probably going to see the biggest transformation. There's also potentially, some political changes that will happen with the town of Fort Myers Beach. What those look like remain to be seen, but in one way, shape, or form, we're going to have a change that happens with how the town operates, the players that are in the market, because a lot of folks are now coming into market to Fort Myers Beach and are going to be a big part of the redevelopment. Not that any of us would have wanted any of this to happen for this reason. I mean, I think if any of us could press the reset button, we would in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But we are where we are. And now that we're there, you have to look around the landscape and say, where are there potentially some opportunities and some things to be aware of and keep in mind? And I think Fort Myers Beach is going to be a vastly different place 3 to 5 years from now.
And then by vastly different, I mean, I hate to say it, but larger corporation feel because of the opportunity, and they have the deep pockets, but still the charm of a mix of maybe Hickory area where you get nicer homes, coming in.
Yeah, that's a fair representation. Some of what's happened on Bonita Beach on Hickory Boulevard and the new construction that's
Right.
taken over there the past 7 to 8 years had already trickled up
It was
onto
yeah.
Fort Myers.
Yeah.
So it was already in process. I think it's definitely fair to say that the new version of Fort Myers Beach is certainly going to be a higher priced, higher end product line. Obviously, it's going to be new, but I think even from the standpoint of the product we're looking at, we're going to be looking at high end product. And I mean, again, some of that's going to happen, I think, in our coastal communities in general. There's a reality regarding the cost associated with living on the coast. And we
We know
see
it.
that at
We know it.
in
We
every
know it
angle,
now.
whether it's taxes, insurance, cost to put things back together if something happens. And so that's just reality. And it means, unfortunately, that some of the options for living on the coastline that were more affordable have simply gone away. They've literally gone away
Right,
as it relates to this storm. We're not going to be able to put that back together the way that it was. It's just not practical.
Right.
So that's, I think, in a nutshell, the change we're looking at down
And
there.
then contrast that to Sanibel. What do you see? Sanibel, pretty much the entire island was underwater. The actual land was, maybe not every home was underwater, but all of the land pretty much was. So, your single story, older homes, or, even single story on a piling set up. What does that look like? How does that change?
Sanibel, so it's a totally different dynamic, which is why, again, I think that
Which is interesting because they're literally like
they're right
3
next to
miles
each other.
apart.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I think that you have to look at each market in a silo. And Sanibel has already been a premium market. And I'll use Sanibel and Sanibel Captiva kind of interchangeably. That's been a premium market in Southwest Florida. You didn't have many older uses that kind of lagged from a value perspective. So
Well, if you did, they're not there.
they're not there anymore, right? And so
But there weren't as many.
no, there isn't as much, I think, of an upward trajectory in pricing because Sanibel's already been a premium market.
Right.
But I think we're already seeing a number of condo associations that are on the beach that are having to make some difficult decisions. I mean,
Right.
there hadn't been new construction for condos on Sanibel. I think 2003, 2004 was maybe the most recent project. And the building or the roof on that building was ripped off.
Right.
I mean, if you look at the aerials post-storm,
Right.
the condos on Sanibel, the roofs you're looking down into units. And that's going to create, again, a series of choices that have to be made about the future of those projects, what they come back as, But I don't think we're going to be looking at as stark a change as we are somewhere like Fort Myers Beach.
Right.
Now, is the setback line on Sanibel, is that going to come into play on any of these condos?
Yeah, so the coastal construction control line
Yeah.
is going to come into play on a lot of things. I think there's probably a couple of unresolved items as it relates to that, but I think it's fair to say that if you had a pre-existing building that was in compliance with that CCCL line when it was constructed, you'll most likely be able to come back inside of that footprint. There's likely going to be some DEP hoops to jump through with getting your permit, but they'll probably be able to put those back in the way that they had them, in the location that they, existed before.
A little like a curious question on the historic buildings, because we have some historic,
Right.
Florida historic. They're credentialed. They're in the archives. What do some of them were damaged severely? How do those buildings get impacted?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because, we had buildings that were over 100 years old washed away, which is critical context more broadly about the storm.
It's terrible.
This was
It
not
breaks
a
my heart.
50-year or
Right.
100-year storm event. Like, this was extremely unique. Structures that are contributing structures in a historic district have an exemption as it relates to the 50% rule. Now, it's important to caveat that you can be a building inside of a geographic area that is historically designated, but not be a historic
building.
structure. So the structure needs to be recognized by a historic district. But if you're in that category, you're able to kind of sidestep the 50%.
Are there
rule.
any in downtown Fort Myers that would catch that category that were damaged? Like I think of the Burroughs homes. Is that a Florida contributing historic?
Yeah, and I
building?
think the Burroughs home, I don't know the answer.
I'm
they
asking
they
about
might
that
be
one.
on the national registry. It's
Okay.
a contributing structure.
Sure.
But I think it might actually be on the national registry. So those structures will be able to build back. We'll actually have, I think, a few of these things in some of our older coastal communities, older fishing
Oh, yeah.
communities. There's some structures that I think have this benefit that people haven't even realized yet.
Yeah.
So
So we could see some of those older fish villages that kind
Right.
of stay,
right.
which gives you that feel of what it was.
Absolutely.
It'll look new.
Oh, exactly. Right. But you'll be able to, kind of sidestep the
Yeah.
rule on some of those properties.
Keep some of the charm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I do know of a couple historical buildings in the Boca Grande area,
Yes.
particularly that if you've never been down in South Boca Grande, it's fun to go into their historic area. Again, doesn't mean it's a historic building, but go into the historic buildings and you're like, wow, this is
Sure.
old Florida right here. It's just beautiful. Like,
It really is.
and to lose those, on Sanibel and I don't know the specific ones that were out there, but Fort Myers Beach, I want those built back because that
Sure.
is Florida.
Absolutely.
That's like the second generation, right? Floridian want that history there because it's just so special.
It is, and that's again where there'll be some good news. We'll be able to do some things as it relates to those properties, and that's part of what informs what I described earlier about if we really condense it down and say, gosh, how many properties are we going to truly lose because of the 50% rule? I think it's going to be a much lower number than what we initially feared.
Right.
That's good.
There's probably one other update that I would want to make sure I provide on the 50% rule. So I think I mentioned that Lee County revised their ordinance a week ago today. Among the revisions in the ordinance is to the definition of market value inside of that ordinance. And in essence, what it did is it equates market value to actual cash value. So without getting into the weeds on that, the net of that is that the methodology that we use on the private appraisal side is going to have some more flexibility, and it should actually allow for higher structure values to be substantiated because this methodology has been endorsed within Lee County's ordinance. So prior to that, there were a number of ways that structure value could be determined. But now we've got kind of a hemmed-in process of what this looks like. And again, I think we're going to see the other municipalities local follow suit
So
over
you're-
the coming days and weeks.
Translating just a little bit of that. Remember, I'm just the insurance guy here, but really, like, you're going to be, if let's just say someone had this challenge with the 50% rule, what's just been passed in some of these provisions allows for a little bit more flexibility than some stringent process that we were looking at before, where they take, just the just value of a property.
Right.
Is that
Yeah, that's the net takeaway. Policymakers are making it easier through pulling back that 5-year requirement that we
Right.
talked about earlier, through allowing for an actual cash value, and in fact endorsing that as a methodology. Some of the just practical things that are happening at permitting are going to be helpful and be impactful. So I think, again, there's the first step with the 50% rule is, for one, to see if you can get through permitting with that published assessed structure value. That's step one.
that's
And
the value?
and
You can go right on the property
you go on
appraiser,
right.
see your just value.
Yep. You click on that yellow hyperlink that's on the parcel detail page. You pull it up after you put an email address in, and there's a line that says building value. That's the number you're dealing with. And I say that, and
But
people should use that.
that'll probably eliminate
For most people, that takes care of
75, maybe 90%
Absolutely.
of phone calls on, do I need to
Yeah.
worry about this 50% rule?
And I say that as the provider of step 2.
Gotcha.
Okay,
I
so
understand.
people, if that doesn't work for them, they need to contact to have a private appraisal done. And there's going to be plenty of folks who drop into that bucket. But if you're not in that bucket, go ahead and use the assessed structure value. It will be low. You should know that. By definition, it's low. No one is saying that that's truly the market value of your structure. We're using those figures kind of as a proxy to work the permitting process. But if you can get through it, then do it. Don't spend your money on a private appraisal or spend the time. Great, move on down the road.
Yeah.